Hello and welcome. My name is Jose Ortiz Jr., and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the New York City Employment and Training Coalition. I want to thank you for joining our virtual forum today, where we'll discuss the role of workers in a resilient and inclusive recovery. Almost 800 people have registered for this forum on Zoom. Even more New Yorkers are watching tonight's important conversation on our YouTube channel. A quick moment for thank yous. Thank you to our incredible team and board of directors for their invaluable support. Thank you to our partners, the New York City Workforce Funders Collaborative, the Center for an Urban Future, the Center for New York City Affairs at the New School, the City University of New York, the Consortium for Worker Education, Jobs First NYC, the Literacy Assistance Center, the New York Association for Training and Employment Professionals, and the Workforce Professionals Training Institute for their co-sponsorship. And finally, thank you to our moderator and the candidates for participating in this evening's important discussion. Tonight's forum will include ASL interpretation and live captioning in English with customizable translations in Spanish, Chinese, and French. Thank you to Caitlin, our captioner, and Liz and Lorraine, our ASL interpreters, who are here with us this evening. Now for some context on tonight's forum and why it is so critical to invest in job training and workers following the health and economic toll of COVID-19. Over the course of the pandemic, New York City experienced the worst single-year decline in jobs since the 1930s. Job losses were 2 times higher in New York City than any other area in the United States. More than 500,000 New Yorkers are currently unemployed. Workers across every socioeconomic experience and educational background were hit hard. But we also know that job losses disproportionately impacted women, people of color, immigrants, and historically marginalized communities. We're here tonight to hear from the candidates about how we can recover together while building a more inclusive economy in a way that invests in and supports a talent-driven economic development model. We invite everyone here tonight to review the coalition's latest report as a roadmap for how all communities across the city can better thrive when we recognize our workforce as the cornerstone for prosperity. You can find the report and more information about our work and all of our partners at nycetc.org. That's nycetc.org. We can't just go back to the way our economy worked before, because it didn't work for everyone. Workforce development is the connective tissue between community and the economy. Without it, far too many will not be able to productively participate in the recovery, with potential for dire consequences to our city's economy. So we're eager to hear from our mayoral candidates and their vision for workforce development as part of our shared recovery. I'm now going to hand it over to Errol Lewis, the host of Inside City Hall on New York One. Thank you, Errol, for moderating this evening's discussion. And I'll now turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Joey. And I am glad to see that there are well over 200 people watching this. And I hope that folks will spread the word as we go through the discussion between now and 7 p.m., as well as afterwards, since I'm sure we'll have this archived and available for further discussion. We're coming down to the wire when it comes to selecting a new mayor, as well as many, many important city offices, the controller, the borough presidents, the city council. The tone will matter, the decisions will matter a great deal, and we are pleased that several of the mayoral candidates wanted to have this discussion with us tonight. We're going to be talking to Sean Donovan, former housing secretary for the federal government, former OMB director, and former Commissioner of Housing Preservation and Development right here in the city. We're also going to talk with Eric Adams, the current Brooklyn Borough President, longtime state senator, and who also, of course, served on the NYPD for a long time. And has a lot to say about jobs and about the future of this city. Catherine Garcia, best known to people as the sanitation commissioner, but who has done a bunch of other things in government, and most recently was the emergency food czar during the pandemic, is going to be talking with us as well. They all have a deep expertise in government at multiple levels, including the federal level. And so we can get a little bit into the weeds and into the mechanics of how to make the current situation better. Let me check with the producers and make sure we have all of the candidates with us. Are we ready to begin?
We are.
We are. Okay, great. So with that, let me greet all of the candidates. Thank you all for being here. I want to start with you, Sean Donovan, but I certainly want to hear from all of the candidates on this. In the short term, we've got an emergency situation. As Joey described, we've got hundreds of thousands of people who are out of work. The estimate is that over 200,000 under the best case scenario are not going to be back in place by the end of this year. President Biden has included $100 billion for workforce development, and close to $6 billion of that has been allocated for New York City, along with $7 billion in federal education aid. And they both of those pots have to be used by 2024. So given those conditions, Sean Donovan, and assuming the current city administration doesn't allocate them first, if you're sworn in front of City Hall on January 1st, what would be the first concrete action you would take as mayor to connect our unemployed neighbors to training, upskilling, job placement, knowing that we have these federal resources that will be arriving?
Well, Errol, first of all, it's great to see you. It's great to be back with the Employment and Training Coalition, Joey, and everyone else for the remarkable work that you do. And look, we have to acknowledge that we are not going to be able to train folks for jobs at businesses that don't exist. And I think the very first thing I would do as mayor is make sure that we're getting as much aid as possible from Washington, D.C., not just, Errol, on the training assistance that you talked about, but PPP, unemployment insurance, all of the things that we can make sure get invested in our small businesses. And no one's in a better position in this race to be able to work with the Biden-Harris administration, our leaders in Congress, to make sure we finally get the money we deserve in DC. But I would also say, as somebody who started 30 years ago working with a nonprofit in the South Bronx, in central Brooklyn, channeling aid to small businesses, to owners who often didn't understand how to get through the red tape, it is absolutely critical. And I would bring to the table the very first day the Employment and Training Coalition, all of our nonprofits and other groups that work closely with small businesses to ensure that they're actually getting the aid that they need. We saw that with PPP. It was a disaster when it first happened. Small businesses weren't getting that aid, and we need to change that. And then the last thing I would say, Errol, to go more directly to your specific question about the training funds, is I would ensure that we really are creating the linkages between the Employment and Training Coalition with our high schools and CUNY, our community colleges and 4 years, and then with the private sector businesses to make sure that we are actually training for jobs that our students are going to be taking, and that we're building those training programs in partnership with the private sector to ensure that we're not training people for jobs that don't exist and putting them on a road to nowhere. So that's going to be a critical part, day one, of what I'm going to do to build that coalition.
Now, I mean, jumping ahead a little bit, because we will talk about how you plan to structure this, who would be the cabinet day one, right? I mean, literally, you're sworn in, you've signed your papers, you've paid whatever it is, the $3. You go in, now you're the mayor. Who's doing this? Which commissioners? What part of city government is going to fulfill this vision you just laid out?
Well, obviously, we're going to need small business services and our Economic Development Corporation at the table. But the issue is, if you only have those agencies, if you don't have the schools chancellor, if you don't have our housing agencies and all of the other agencies where these potential jobs could be spurred through city investments, you're not going to get the holistic investment that you need. I'll give you just one very specific example, Errol. We have a huge opportunity at this moment, especially in the midst of the pandemic, to make New York City the leading public health and life sciences city in the world. We have all the ingredients, the best hospitals, we have remarkable educational institutions, we have the venture capital to do that. But we only will be able to do that if we're actually bringing every part of the city together. The Health and Hospitals Corporation, our Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, all of those need to be at the table, along with our private sector partners to make sure we're truly building a kind of cradle to career pipeline into those jobs. And that's a good example of the kind of holistic approach that you need. And this is why you need someone at City Hall who's really going to coordinate this work. I would certainly think, you asked about the cabinet, Joey Ortiz, I think, would make a great person to lead these efforts at City Hall, but that's not an offer of an employment or anything at this point.
Okay, Eric Adams, same question. You're sworn in, you've got your heart's desire, you've done all the formalities, you've delivered a stirring speech, and you've got, if we're fortunate, something in the range of $13 billion for education and workforce development. How do you implement it, knowing that there are hundreds of thousands, literally of hundreds of thousands of jobs that have vanished, and you need to get people in those jobs as soon as possible?
Errol, great question, and this is a great organization. And what I have done for the last 2.5 years, I sat down with over 270 different leaders and thinkers each day from 8 to 9, 9 to 10, one at a time. And that is when you look at my document, 100 plus steps forward for New York City. It is the result of those meetings and discussions. And this organization has been a part of that. So when I walk in, as I stated, I know who my police commissioner is. I know who my chancellor will be. I know some of my major agencies based on those conversations, who are the commissioners. And so I'm not going to be starting from day one looking for people to fill the position. Day one, we will be ready to hit the ground. And what's very important is we need to speak to the people who have been doing the work for years. And this organization has clearly given me the ideas on how we can really address the problem. So just answering your question specifically, we will have the team in place. We will put in place either a deputy mayor of workforce development or a czar. Whomever it is, they will report directly to me, because this is an important initiative and agenda that we must get right. And hopefully we're not going to spend the $10 to $13 billion before we take office based on the recent budget. I think it's imperative for the city to go after underlying reasons that continue to produce a dysfunctional product. And this organizations and others who have been in this space, they know the answers, and we need to start implementing the programs they have been speaking about.
And Eric Adams, there's a temptation when you have a high priority and you are trying to make numbers move quickly, and you don't have a lot of time to spend with each commissioner. We are still in the middle of an emergency recovery period. The temptation is to try and run the numbers up, right? If somebody can come to you and say, well, we can get a lot of placements, we can get a lot of folks to have jobs for 90 days, and we can check it off and mission accomplished. But as you're going to hear repeatedly tonight, the economic recovery has to center on Black and brown communities that were hardest hit by the pandemic. The historic disinvestment, the historic marginalization is very important to this coalition, meaning hard to employ people who were relatively hard to employ in some cases before the pandemic, needs to be a priority. How do you make sure that that doesn't get lost in the shuffle or fall victim to wanting to be able to hit numerical targets? What are you going to tell your commissioners?
Leaning on my previous experience in technology, we're going to create a GIS mapping system, and it's going to do two things. Number one, there must be a holistic approach to this. We're going to identify the jobs that are available and have a centralized application system so that we can use that mapping not only to identify the skills deficits based on where you live and the areas, also language barriers, bridge the gaps between the skills that people need. We're going to then use that to match the jobs that are out there with the individuals who are, number one, looking for a job, and number two, what skills that are needed to fill those jobs. And that must not be a one-time action. It must be a continuation of analyzing the changing and shifting needs. And we're failing to do that now, to do it in real time. And so having a centralized application process and having a database of all the available jobs out there and what are the skills that are needed so we can be in a perpetual state of updating the skills that we're giving to our young people and those who are young adults and adults, and make sure that we start doing the proper matching. Technology will help us make sure we're trending in the right direction and we're continually updating the needs of our employee pool and employers.
Mm-hmm. And Sean Donovan, same question to you. How do you make sure that the communities of color that have been hard hit, the frontline communities that were most devastated by the pandemic, get priority as the jobs recovery gets tackled on an emergency basis?
Errol, I would start with an idea that I rolled out my very first day I announced my campaign, that I would be the first mayor in the history of the city to appoint a chief equity officer reporting directly to me, who has the authority over every agency in the city to create real accountability. And that means that we would be looking at not just the number of jobs, but the quality of those placements, retention, and who is getting those jobs, so that it is truly equitable. Because you're exactly right. This has to be quality over quantity, and it has to be focused on those that are too often left behind. And the other thing I would say is this really ties into my education platform and the work that I've been doing, laying out a really bold agenda about how do we create these pathways from cradle to career into jobs. So I've committed that every single high school student would have at least one paid internship, apprenticeship, summer job before they graduate. That's an opportunity to really connect in to what we'd be doing with this funding to ensure that we're directing it to those communities and those students who need it most. I am committed to making community college free in New York City and ensuring that we're building a Center for the Future of Work at CUNY that could work very closely with the training funds and those implementing it to make sure that we are training both for the jobs of the future, but also that we're building the pathways, especially from our community colleges, into those jobs. And then I would make sure through my 15-minute neighborhood proposal that we're actually locating the training and other services in the communities that are too often left behind. And that's going to require really reaching out and building partnerships in the communities that have been disproportionately devastated by COVID, and frankly, that have been again and again left behind in these kind of initiatives. So all three of those pieces are going to be my strategy to make sure that this is equitable.
On that proposal for high school internships for every student, is that an obligation or is that an offer?
Well, as the father of 21 and 19-year-old boys, I know that you can lead horses to jobs, but you can't make them drink. And I would be satisfied in the first few years with making sure that we have an offer to every high school student. But let's be clear, Errol, kidding aside, that's a warning flag to me that this is something, if we don't have folks who are actually taking it up, if we're seeing that disproportionately in communities of color, and if we're seeing that even if those connections happen, but they're not leading to better connections to the workforce and longer term, then that's something the chief equity officer would absolutely be looking at and saying, what's the problem here? I have always been deeply data driven in the work that I've done in every issue. I did manage a $4 trillion budget, so you could say I'm a numbers guy. And absolutely, we're going to be focused on the quality, not just the quantity. And particularly if there are warning flags of high school students saying, we're not interested.
Okay.
And Errol, if I could just touch on
Yes.
that a bit, because I think Sean's idea is the right direction of both internships and externships. But what I think is important, the DOE must be connected to the various industries in the city. Right now, the Department of Education operates in a bubble. And if we don't allow the various corporations in the city to be part of the curriculum development, they know what skills are needed from the young people who are graduating from school or those with continuing education. And with these internships, it can't be just at the end of the year and we are cycling them into a program. No, we need to corporations in the school throughout the school year, allowing young people to see what's interesting to them, exposure, because many of these children have never left their neighborhood. And if we don't bring our corporations into the inner cities and so that our young people can see what's available, then of course at the end of the year, they're going to be reluctant. So it must be a real holistic continuing approach built into the school calendar so they will be excited at the end of the year to get involved in the internship program.
Okay. Yeah. Look, as the father of a 15-year-old, I mean, in recent years, we've had to, threaten to kick him out of the house during the summer. Didn't even want to go to camp, and of course, sitting around playing video games is no kind of a summer.
I think, Errol, it's because he loves being home with his parents so much.
Oh yeah, right. Well, the only reason we had to kick him out was, said like some of us have to work, dude. You're not going to sit around the house here. Let me widen the lens a little bit, and we got at least one question from some of our viewers on this call. And let's widen the lens a little bit to talk about economic development broadly. Where we are, in fact, coming out of this pandemic. Right now, workforce development is generally not integrated into economic development planning. We don't even do that much planning, frankly. But even when it comes to investments and incentives, projects often get built with little input from the local community. That's what people like me in the media tend to focus on. But often, even when there is input, there's not much of a plan on how neighborhood residents will get the jobs developed by the projects. What do you see? We'll start with you, Eric Adams. What do you see as the most effective and concrete way to put workforce development into the recovery infrastructure projects that are going to be needed, as well as broader, once we emerge from the pandemic, however you want to define that, your broader economic development plan? How do you integrate workforce development into it?
One of the best ideas I received from ETC, and I think it's brilliant. What we must do, we must stop the siloing of our goals into sort of sections. It must be a holistic approach. And so when we talk about rezoning, attached to that rezoning should be workforce development. When we talk about government subsidies going to different initiatives or attracting different businesses here, attached to that should be also workforce development. Whenever we use taxpayers' dollars to do something to subsidize or benefits such as rezoning, attached to that must be workforce development. And when you do that, you start to have a more holistic approach to ensuring that we're not just dealing with affordable housing, we're also dealing with the employment aspect of that. And that's everything from being an individual who's a broker, real estate agent, the carpenter, the electrician, every aspect of that governmental subsidized process or rezoning process or benefit coming from our city. We need to build in a workforce development component to it, just as we do with attaching parks or entry to subway stations. We need to start rethinking attaching workforce development to everything that we do with taxpayers' dollars.
Okay, Sean Donovan, what do you think of that idea? We have, the project labor agreement to get the project done. There's the community benefits agreement to help get some community buy-in. Perhaps a workforce plan that's baked into the development process.
Absolutely, Errol. And I want to say this is not just theory, right? This is something that I've done, whether at HPD or as housing secretary and as budget director, was really looking at strategies where you can sync up with the training that we need. And look, part of the problem, let's be frank, is that we've had an administration that too often sees the private sector and other partners as the problem rather than a partner. And we need to make sure that we're actually looking out at the jobs of the future as we have an economic development strategy that, for example, as I said, would invest in life sciences and public health to make us the leading city in the world. We should be doing the same thing, for example, with climate. And just to give a very specific example, Local Law 97, which is a path-breaking law in this city to bring to make our buildings more sustainable. One of the things I've proposed is that on day one, we would do a job audit of all the jobs that we expect to come out of that. I also believe if you look at, for example, President Biden's investment in wind power on the East Coast, we have a huge opportunity to bring not just a port to New York that would bring in those turbine pieces from Europe, would ship them out, assemble them, install them, maintain them. Those are a huge opportunity for jobs. But think about, for example, as we get billions of dollars through my plans into public housing and put solar on the roofs, really bring the systems into the 21st century, make them more sustainable. Those are all opportunities for partnering with unions, partnering with private sector partners, where we're really moving in sync, where the long-term economic development plans of the industries we're going to grow that are high paying, that have real opportunity, that we're creating a training ladder all the way through in every one of those. And I'm really encouraged if you think about the work that Gail Mello, for example, who was president of LaGuardia Community College, is now doing with private sector leaders around the city. There's a huge opportunity to sink in with what's already happening. And the problem is we haven't had leadership at City Hall that is really coordinating with and partnering with our unions, our private sector to do exactly that every time you have economic development initiatives.
Okay. We are joined by Catherine Garcia. Very good to see you, our third candidate tonight. And just to catch you up, what we're doing now is kind of widening the lens a little bit to talk about economic development, both in the immediate post-pandemic recovery period, as well as regular economic development once the immediate emergency has passed. How would you integrate workforce concerns into your economic development strategy for the city?
Yes, the two have been living in silos for a very long time. First and foremost, they need to report to the same deputy mayor. We shouldn't be doing any economic development that doesn't ensure that there are middle-class jobs that feed a family for people who live here. But it's also about having a long view. We know that wind is coming. We should be starting those training programs today. We know that there is going to be growth in the life sciences, in film and TV, in healthcare industry. We need to make sure that we are doubling down and feeding our young people into these. And one of those programs that I was promoting earlier this week is Here to Here, where high school students have opportunities to be a part of those programs, to actually have a work experience with a private sector employer so that they can learn about what their opportunities are. But there is also two other big pieces. Making sure that we're using our trade schools, that when you are graduating from our trade schools, who are going to be educating kids on how do you wire a new building so that you are decarbonizing the economy? How do you lay cables so that we can get broadband to everyone, that they are getting real career ladders into the future. But you know, not everyone comes right out of school and has had that opportunity. We know that 63% of the jobs in New York require a post-secondary credential. And in many neighborhoods, only about 20% of kids have that. We know that we have to be making investments earlier on to ensure that our young people are ready to take on the challenges of the 21st century. And that is why economic development, who we're bringing here, what types of jobs, we have to make sure we are ready and matched up so that we all benefit from them.
Okay, folks, we've had a nice sort of leisurely pace to our discussion so far. I'm going to have to be a little bit more like the way I sometimes have to rush you on television, so I'll apologize in advance, but there's a lot of questions out there that we do want to get some answers to, and I know you've got probably something pressing to do at 7 o'clock. Let me ask something that is on the minds of everyone watching this, which is the RFP and contract process for those who are doing the work of connecting up people with jobs. And I'll start with you, Catherine Garcia, because in your fireside chat with Joey Ortiz, you mentioned something that kind of rang a bell with me, that, as sanitation commissioner, if you needed to buy salt, you procured the salt, you put out the bid, you paid what was required, and you had the salt. When it comes to workforce development and other nonprofits, the city policy is, in many cases, to pay 80 cents on the dollar, 75 cents on the dollar, long procurement process. The work in some cases is supposed to be done first so that the nonprofit is actually, in effect, making a loan to the city of New York. As mayor, what would you do to change and improve that system?
Oh, yes, this is a topic close to my heart, procurement. Doesn't get everybody else all excited, but we have to fundamentally reform our procurement process. We cannot have our social service agencies, who are the backbone of helping New Yorkers in need, be our banks. This is about holding the commissioners accountable for getting those contracts out the door and getting them signed so you do get paid. I understand how to do that. I did that. I didn't know there was another way to do it with my vendors. And when I'm mayor, we will fix that process. But I also want to make sure that I'm bringing social service agencies to the table, because I believe that we're making the contracts too complicated, that we don't have the right indirect number in them, that we measure and make you do a lot of paperwork to get paid that isn't about the result we want. Like, did you actually get that person a job and a career? That's the only metric I want to see.
Okay, Eric Adams.
Yeah, thanks, Errol. Listen, the entire system is antiquated. Some of the European cities that are using an automated process, everything from using the right algorithm to see what's the best price you're receiving, the timeliness of the payment. There's no reason, if you are a vendor in this city, that you have to start from scratch over and over again. That's what the My City card is about. That is, I am going to put in place. If you sign up one time, give all of your basic information, you just have to make these simple changes that is new for that particular RFP that you are responding to. We are too bureaucratic, too difficult, and too challenging to navigate our system. And then if you are a nonprofit, we need to have a real net 30. We need to fulfill our obligation and have a greater level of flexibilities. When I communicated with many of the nonprofits, and he told me how they could not use the MetroCard dollars, although the system was closed down, to deal with PPEs and food for those who are in need, that is too rigid and it's not accomplishing our goal.
Okay, Sean Donovan.
Errol, as somebody who started my career at a nonprofit 25 years ago, and someone who led the entire contracting process for the federal government, folks forget about the M in OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, where we dramatically sped up these processes. I agree with Catherine and Eric on what they've said. I would also say that I have a unique record in this race of actually having accomplished these at a scale even bigger than all of New York City. But I think we have to go farther than actually fixing procurement, paying quickly and effectively, reforming the contracts. This is also about how we value nonprofits as partners. It is crazy to me to say that a for-profit contractor can get a higher reimbursement rate, can take profit out of, when nonprofits are even more important partners in our ecosystem of providing services around the city. So what I would do is fundamentally reorient that, as I did at HUD, to make sure that nonprofits can actually build working capital, that we are helping them build workforce of their own, and not expecting that they're simply going to survive on the good feelings they get from helping people, but actually invest in them as the critical organizations they are. You know, during the Great Recession, when I was still housing commissioner here, I got together with some friends and created a nonprofit called Greater New York that supports the networking and mentoring of nonprofit leaders around the city. I'm back on the board now. It's doing exactly the same thing through this crisis, is helping make sure that nonprofits can actually grow and thrive. And so there's much more we need to do to really create that ecosystem beyond just reforming procurement.
Okay, let me ask you all for some show of hands. I'll ask just a couple of specific proposals that some of the viewers have put forward. Mayor de Blasio has committed to fully funding the indirect cost rate initiative for fiscal year 2022. Can you commit to continuing that investment and supporting the nonprofit sector in that fashion? Yes? Okay. Are you committed to creating, well, you know, some of you talked around it. Who here would create a deputy mayor for workforce development, economic development, and housing in order to sort of consolidate some of the issues that you all have talked about?
I would consolidate, but I don't know if those are the right. I believe in a team concept, putting together teams for various initiatives, but there's definitely a need to consolidate the top end of the office.
Got it. What about a flexible and dedicated workforce development fund to provide sustainable long-term funding for employment and training programs across various agencies and initiatives? Workforce Development Fund? Okay. Let me ask one or two more, and then we've got some questions from some of our viewers. Should the minimum wage be raised annually?
I say yes.
Keep up with inflation.
In the city and at the national level too.
Yes, absolutely. Should gig workers be employees with all of the rights that regular workers have?
Yes.
I believe it should be their options.
Yeah. Sean
Agreed.
Donovan? Yes. Okay. Do you commit to having at least 10% of all funds allocated for economic development directed for the sole purpose of building neighborhood-based talent pipelines and other workforce initiatives? Yes, at least 10%. Okay, there you go. All right, I think that has answered all of those questions. Now we have some folks who sent in questions and some audience questions that we really want to get to. This is from Barbara Chang from CareerWise. Prior to the pandemic, there were over 118,000 out of school, out of work young adults in New York City, disconnected youth. For those that were working, 61% were in part-time jobs. Recent data shows that in spring 2020, between 259,000 and 324,000 young adults are neither working nor in school, a huge increase in the number of disconnected youth. How would your economic recovery plan target those young adults, especially those who are already experiencing barriers to employment opportunity before the pandemic? Let's start with you, Catherine Garcia. Real quick answers, please.
Yeah, this is where we need to know what is going on with these young people, because the likelihood that this takes them off the rails and out of a career path is absolutely critical. So we need to make sure that we are using our social service agencies, not only our workforce development, because we got to go find them where they are, to bring them back in and support them with real job opportunities, where you know that if you're going through the training, you will have a good job at the end. That is incredibly motivating.
Sean Donovan.
So I think this goes back to what I said, in addition to focusing on high school students, ensuring that as we're building the most comprehensive New York City Job Corps training program in the history of the city, that we are drawing those folks in. And I think there's a huge opportunity, particularly with the reinvestment that I'm going to do from our criminal justice system. I've made the most specific commitment and plan to reinvest $3 billion by the end of my first term, and to invest in communities. Exactly the folks we're talking about, those disconnected youth, are much more likely to be involved with our criminal justice system. And we need to ensure that we're investing in the kind of community-based programs like Neon and so many others that get them reconnected and actually put them on the pathway to jobs.
Okay, Eric Adams.
And I think Catherine alluded to it, and I agree. We need to find them where they are. This is not a 9-to-5 downtown, come to my office space so you can learn what we're doing. No, we need a team connected to the crisis management team, giving them the resources and information to go throughout 24 hours, 7 days a week, not 9-to-5. I remember as a captain in the police department during midnights, finding young people at certain locations. We need to reach them where they are, where young people assemble. And then let's take an opportunity with the retail stores that have closed down. We laughed about it, but let's open game rooms. Our children enjoy playing games. Let's show them the business aspects of playing games. And while we have them in there, let's connect them to the services that will put them on an employment path. So we need to meet young people where they are, not where we are. Let's meet them where they are and take them where they ought to be.
Okay, thanks very much. Our next question comes from Ken Adams from LaGuardia Community College. What is your vision for how CUNY can be an important partner to the economic and workforce development communities? How can all assets of CUNY be leveraged to help the city, including our community colleges, senior colleges, graduate programs, faculty, and research? And let's start with you, Mr. Donovan.
So shout out to Ken. Great question. A neighbor in Brooklyn and a former colleague, and so excited about the work he's doing at LaGuardia. Look, as I said earlier, we have to recognize that CUNY is one of the jewels of our public education system in this country. In my work with leaders like Raj Chetty and others who've really looked at which school systems around the country are real engines of economic mobility, CUNY constantly comes out at the top. And yet we've had a mayor and a city that have not treated CUNY as an indispensable partner. And so, as I talked about earlier, I would ensure not just that we're building deeper connections between our high schools and our school system more broadly with CUNY. I would also create a Center for the Future of Work. I would make community college free. And I would really engage our 2-year and 4-year colleges at CUNY into our workforce development programs in a much more fundamental way, as I think we've started to see, and as LaGuardia is doing and others, but there's so much more potential to build on that and really bring it to scale going forward. And that's exactly what I would do as mayor.
Okay. Catherine Garcia.
Yes, no, CUNY has absolutely been something we need to invest in and bring to the table because it does drive economic mobility. And that means when I'm mayor, it is about bringing the private sector and the public sector and CUNY together to talk about where are the jobs? Where's the research CUNY can be doing to tell us what are the developing industries so that we do have graduates who are getting employment in both the private and the public sector so they thrive no matter what they're doing. It's pointless to have an education system where you don't feel you are going to have a career at the end. And we have not intentionally made those connections at scale.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Eric Adams.
Yes, and those connections are really failing so many young people. Number one, every CUNY institution should be connected to a K through 12 school, everything from the district schools. There should be a real pipeline to CUNY. Even if that young person is not going to attend CUNY, they should know the entire college atmosphere. It's almost as a big brother, big sister relationships. They should adopt schools on the elementary level, the middle school and the high school level with a clear pathway. And I agree with Sean that we should be talking about the community colleges being free because you find a greater level of diversity inside our CUNY system. I'm a CUNY twofer, and we need to duplicate the program we see over at New York City College of Technology, the school I attended. Their employment rates and their skills rates of students who attend there is extremely amazing. And I think those are the types of programs that will prepare our children for not only certificate type programs, but degree type programs, but they must be engaged in elementary and middle school and high school, a pathway to college and create a college environment.
Okay. We are coming right up to the end of our time. I'm going to ask the candidates to indulge me. I will get you out of here in the next couple of minutes. You'll answer these questions quickly. I've got 2 more audience questions. Julie Samuels from Tech NYC.
I honestly have a 7 o'clock. I apologize. But I am so glad that I was able to jump on here. I think that it is hugely important that we make investments in our workforce development organizations, because our young people are critical to how we're going to grow in the future.
Okay, we will get your response in another forum.
Absolutely. I'm
This
sure we'll see each other again.
this question from Julie Samuels is: many New Yorkers are still suffering a lack of investment in technology infrastructure and access to opportunities in the digital space. Hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers are currently locked out of the recovery economy, where many jobs now permanently exist because of their lack of digital infrastructure and literacy. How will you address the digital divide and its intersection with equitable workforce development strategies, including helping New Yorkers advance in such careers with a growing digital component? Let's start with you, Mr. Donovan.
Thanks for the great question, Julie. Big fan of Tech NYC and all the work that you're doing to bring our city further into the 21st century. And look, if we didn't know before, we've learned from this past year that tech infrastructure is the key infrastructure of the 21st century. I have the most detailed plan to make sure we have universal access to high-speed broadband everywhere in our city as part of my innovation plan that you can see on SeanForNYC.com. Given that we're moving quickly here, I'm not going to go through all of that. But what I would say is there is a critically important piece of this. It's not just wiring and devices. It's the affordability of service that is often the primary barrier for our lowest income families. And that issue that I worked on at HUD with the FCC, there's a huge opportunity to partner with them to bring the resources we need to build out those systems. I also think as we're building individual access, we have to really aggressively move right now to ensure community access, particularly in those communities, Julie, that you asked about. This is why I would open our libraries 7 days a week with expanded hours. And it's why I would invest in hubs in communities to allow digital access as we're building it out to every household in the city.
Okay, Eric Adams.
We need to re-examine our franchise agreement with Verizon and others. They have failed us. I voted against renewal of the agreement on the franchise board. We need to have a serious look at turning high-speed broadband Wi-Fi into a utility. We can't continue to stay on this road. It's no longer a luxury, it's a necessity. And then again, we need to have a real GIS mapping system to see, are we trending in the right direction? You know, my mother used to say, if you don't inspect what you expect, it's all suspect. And we've learned too late to find out that we were betrayed by many of the build out of high-speed broadband Wi-Fi. And then not only would I support opening the libraries, but also we need to open our schools. I had an extended use policy in Brooklyn. We picked up the dollars for nonprofits. We need to build out the schools to have access to high-speed broadband and allow our children to use those facilities after school hours so they can get the accessibility that they need.
Okay. Final question. Wes Moore of the Robin Hood Foundation has this question. New York City is home to a variety of effective career training programs, but most serve just a few dozen to a few hundred people annually. The philanthropic community often invests in these innovative and scalable solutions. What role will your administration play in enabling these programs to serve more New Yorkers, especially our most marginalized job seekers? Let's start with you, Mr. Adams.
Well, first, I would try to convince Wes Moore to stay in the city and not leave and go somewhere else. It's a great talent that we have here. But seriously, again, Errol, we wait for people to come to us. We have to leave that mindset. The problems that inner city communities are facing is really, you have to go on the ground and meet them where they are. And that is how we're going to turn around the fear of actually accessing government. Don't let English be a second language, or don't feel, or someone who's intimidated about walking into a governmental building. We take it for granted that a countless number of people have never been engaged because we have never engaged them. I'm going to have a city hall where we're going to have a real mobile team that's going to be connected with stakeholders on the ground and let people know the services that are available to them. You can't do it inside an office space.
Okay, Sean Donovan.
So a few things on this, Errol, and I'm voting with Eric that we're keeping Wes in the city. It's good to hear your question, Wes. So look, first of all, we have to recognize that if we're really going to scale up, this is the moment where we need to finally partner with the U.S. Department of Labor in a fundamental way. I took on as budget director, we began a full revamping of our employment and training programs across the federal government. As you all know, they sit at many different agencies in the federal government. That work was stopped by Donald Trump, but we have an opportunity to really make sure we bring our federal programs into the 21st century. And I would remind folks that Fiorello LaGuardia transformed New York City because he had a partnership in the last New Deal with a president, FDR. We have an opportunity in this New Deal moment with the scale of investment that's coming in human capital to really transform these programs and get them to scale. Second, what I would say is there's a huge opportunity to invest more city dollars and to be more innovative. I was a path-breaking leader in the federal government at the local level in pay for success and other innovative ways of making sure we're investing private dollars into these kind of programs in ways that really transform them into more successful opportunities. And that's powerful. And then lastly, I would just end, given that this is the last question of the forum, that it's all about working with you, that you are the partners that need to be at City Hall to tell us what's working and what's not, and to be directing money into the things that you are out there trying to scale so that we can really scale these innovative programs to the scale of the challenge which we have, which is 500,000 New Yorkers who are out of work right now and chronic under and unemployment in too many Black and brown communities around this city. That would end if I were mayor.
Okay, that is going to be the last word. I want to thank the candidates for joining us, folks. If I don't see you before our televised debate on May 13th, I'll see you then. We'll wish you the best of luck on the campaign trail. Thanks so much for spending some time with us. I want to thank everybody who was watching at home, and we hope that you'll take what you've learned and spread it around. And of course, we want to thank the New York City Employment and Training Coalition, the team at Berlin Rosen, and others who put this together. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Errol. Thank you, ETC, Joey, everybody. Thank you.